ahead and say hello to all of you joining us. We are going to be talking about Microsoft Copilot, specifically the basic version of what that experience is when you use it within your organization. So the idea here is to get you the generative AI experience that is so popular and talked about in a secure, private, but still powerful environment. For those of you who haven't joined a session with me specifically before, my name's Larissa, and I'm a learning strategist with Planet Technologies. And I have had the opportunity of working with a number of different organizations as they have worked to implement and bring Copilot into their workflows. It's a very different style of approaching the things that we've been so used to doing. So if you have questions throughout our session today, I want to make this as beneficial to you as possible. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, or if it's more urgent, feel free to use the raise your hand feature and I will pause as soon as I can to address what you have going on. So all that being said, today we are going to do an overview of Copilot and that chat experience as a whole. We'll talk about how to access it and spend a decent amount of time looking at the interface and navigational features so that you know where to find all of those nuances and tips and tricks to use. Because Copilot mainly works off of your prompting interaction, we are going to talk a little bit about crafting prompts and some different use cases and some tips and tricks for you. I will say if you're really interested in prompting, we will have a session coming up later in June that will be more focused on different strategies and elements in there. So feel free to look for that as well. So before we get started, I would just love to get a gauge for those of you who have joined so far. How familiar are you with Copilot? And we are just talking about the basic experience. We're not talking about additional licensing or anything like that. Is it one of those things where you know it exists, but haven't really had the opportunity to explore it? Or are you more on the, I use it as a daily partner, I'm already really well versed? There's no wrong answer, but I would love to just see in the chat where you're at so that I can focus in on some of those different points depending on where you're at in your journey. So for those of you who are giving me that number 4, first of all, I'm so excited to hear that. And your feedback and your tips throughout our session today will help others as well. So if you have specific questions you came to get answered, please ask those, but don't be afraid to share your feedback in the chat as well. Looks like we have a really good range though. Admittedly, I know that this is a much larger spectrum than 1 to 4, but this gives a really good idea. The other thing I will say, I neglected to mention it early on. We are recording today's session. The automatically generated recording that's going to show up in the chat area that link won't work for you, but we will be sending a follow-up email with anything you need to access the recording and the details in the slides as well. So just so you know, yes, you will have access to those later on. All right, so let's get into Copilot specific. Now, I know that there are a lot of different tools that are out there, and I know that many of you have probably tested and tried a couple of these. A lot of these different tools have similar strengths with being able to summarize really long documents or help you draft new content. Overall, though, it's really, really important to note that using non-approved AI web services can expose personal or confidential data that you didn't mean to, just in the way that those public tools work. So the good news is when you're using Copilot in your organization's environment with those credentials, you already have built-in data integrity and the normal Microsoft protections that come into play with your cloud documents and everything else. So that's built into this experience and everything we're going to talk about today. But if you have other tools that you're interested in and whatnot, please just make sure that they meet the security requirements and are approved through your organization. For anyone who is more on that 1 to 2, I haven't done a ton of exploring with AI yet. There's two characteristics of any tool that I want to highlight. This is not exclusive to Copilot, but it will impact your engagement as well. So the first characteristic is called hallucinations. Many of you may have heard of this, but this is when the tool you're using provides really convincing, really great sounding responses, but they're inaccurate or maybe sometimes even completely made up data. A lot of the time, this is either due to missing details in our prompt or Copilot not fully understanding its own processes. So there's a number of things that we can do to improve and reduce the likelihood of hallucinations, but it's possible with any tool that generates new content for you. It's just in the nature of how AI works. It is a predictive operation, and so it's not going to be perfect 100% of the time, but it is a fantastic tool. The other characteristic is change. I'm sure you've all seen this, but more than any other tool or software, AI technology is rapidly evolving, and there are times where I will do something one day and come in and a brand new feature makes that way easier, or certain things have moved. It is just a very it's moving a lot. It's moving fast, and we have so many people that are trying to improve the experience for you. So what we do today will likely be outdated tomorrow, but my biggest encouragement to all of you is if you're newer to it, just take on that mindset of this will be a learning experience and I need to grow with this tool. Now, when it comes to GCC, that is the environment that I will be focusing on. And if you don't know what kind of cloud environment your organization runs in, that's okay. Typically, GCC environments are handling, they're different government organizations, sometimes a state and local government or a contractor that's supporting it. At the end of the day, there's two things I want to emphasize when it comes to the government community cloud or GCC cloud. These clouds require a very specific set of security commitments. So they have to be compliant with FedRAMP and have a whole lot of boxes that are ticked when it comes to security. Because of that, you get the added benefit of knowing your data is safe and that it's in US-based data centers and things like that. But on top of that, it will impact how quickly you get certain updates and features. So I know a lot of us will see news about features or things that you can do with Copilot. Those features inherently come a little bit slower to the GCC cloud because of the steps it has to go through for approval. So if you ever have questions on that, please let us know. But that is why sometimes our environments are a little different, and each of us individually are likely going to be in a variety of organizations that can tailor it even more. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes from group to group. Now, I will share this in the chat, but if you are looking to easily log into Copilot, you should be able to do so from this m365.cloud.microsoft. That usually takes you to the home area. If you're not already logged into that browser with your organization's credentials, you should be prompted to do so. And then the biggest thing we want to check is that we have this little shield with a green check mark in the top right corner. What this means is you are signed in with your organization's credentials, and that means that all of the data protections that we're going to talk about today are being applied to your chat. So you're not training the model and all of your data is secure. One of the biggest things that I will say I have noticed with most people when it comes to getting used to Copilot and how to leverage it with your workflows is it's a totally different way of working. I know most of us are really used to going to our favorite search engine, typing in as few words as possible to get our big idea out, and then searching for key links and doing research from there. Copilot Chat changes that whole experience because you're moving from just a search mindset to let me tell you the story and bring you in as a collaborative partner so you can help me on each step of this journey. So it is more of that colleague conversation for the best results, and you can then use it to ask questions or get insight, maybe see what kind of gaps you might be missing, and it can drastically improve what you're capable of doing when it's you doing heads down work by yourself. So why are we emphasizing Copilot? Why are so many organizations using this tool? Copilot is built on the foundational models that are very popular out there right now. So GPT-4, GPT-5, as that rolled out, those are actually part of the foundational model that Copilot uses to answer questions or yield the different results you're looking for. When you're generating images, it's using DALL-E 3, and those are typically changing and improving as those latest models change and evolve as well. The only thing to keep in mind again is just we are in a more secure cloud, so some of those updates come at a different rate. We also like Copilot because of the source transparency. Anytime you're working with a chat, you are able to, usually this happens by default, where Copilot will respond to you and cite its sources throughout its response. So if it's reaching out to the web and trying to pull in new data, it can cite those sources so you can verify that that's an appropriate source to use. And if you attach documents to your chat as well, it will tell you when it pulled from those different documents so that you can have an easier time verifying and validating your results. There is also no knowledge cutoff when you think about the opportunity of reaching out to the real-time web. I will say for some of you, there are organizations that do turn off this web search. So if you have a little notification that says web search is turned off, just know that we're not going to reach out for current data, but it still has a ton of foundational data to run off of, and you can still attach documents for assistance as well. But when we are able to reach out to the web, that means things that were published today now become part of a result that Copilot can help with. And last but not least, our favorite is the data protection. Your conversations are encrypted, they're secure, and they're not ever training the AI model. One of the fundamental ways many of the public tools work is they use your conversations, and as it maybe makes mistakes or you need tweaks, it learns from those conversations and it trains that model. But that is not the case with Copilot in your organization. So rest assured that you are able to use some of those more confidential data types, and it's not going to spread that across your organization to anyone who doesn't have access to it or anything like that. You are fully operating within the rest of your tools just like normal. So I feel like that's a lot of slides. We're going to go through this navigation here together in just a moment, but really at that point, it's as easy as going to the chat, entering your prompt. Of course, we always want to double check our sources because you are ultimately responsible for what you develop with these tools. And then you can continue the conversation and ask questions because they're all contextual topics. So in each conversation, Copilot will build off of each prompt that you send and learn from the responses it's given you. So if you give feedback for adjustments, that all comes into play. So let me come over here, and I apologize. Give me one moment. Let's see here. Give me one moment. I need to reshare my screen. I apologize. I had it up and something switched around on me. So apologies there. All right. Now, before we actually jump into this demo, I do want to ask, since we have a moment, does anyone have any initial questions they're hoping would get answered today and that you're looking to kind of resolve there? I will take a look here at the chat. All right, nothing major coming up, so that is totally fine. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen here. And we are going to be starting, I will be in Microsoft Edge. So if that makes any difference to you, that is just what I will be working in today. You sometimes can pull up Copilot as an application, but it kind of depends on your organization. So this is the most consistent I've seen for the largest audience. So getting started, I put that URL in the chat if you want to copy and paste that. I will share a couple of prompts here in a moment. But right off of the bat, we're going to start on that new chat screen. You can search through M365 in general from this point. And in this basic experience, you should see on that left navigation a chat history. I'm just realizing that I shared my screen, but it's not actually showing. So hopefully that's better now. All right, let's try that again. So this is going to be our chat history. This is where we can start a new chat. Usually that's where it defaults. And then here in the middle, this is where we're going to start all of that prompting magic. But if you're looking for inspiration, there are some options down here for prompt suggestions. So when I select any of these, it's going to start that prompt for me. And in this case, it's recommending that I add in a document as well. So there is a shortcut whenever you're typing your prompt. If you do that /, it usually lets you search your recent documents. It probably won't pull up absolutely everything off your keywords. Sometimes I do have trouble with that, but it should give you a really good head start. And if you still don't see the document you're looking for, let's do that one more time. There's a search bar here. You can upload from your device, or you can search all of your cloud files, including things like Teams documents or SharePoint sites, from the view here for OneDrive. So if you're looking for a Teams site where something's stored, those will be in your quick access. Otherwise, we'll click on My Files, and it should give you the normal experience you have looking through your files and folders. Now, there is a little bit of hidden treasure down here as well. So underneath those 3 suggestions, there is a See More dropdown. These are more suggestions you can use. This is also where you're going to find the prompt gallery. So there are a ton of pre-created prompts that Microsoft has put together to give you a head start. This can also serve as a source of inspiration when you're trying to figure out what all Copilot could potentially help you with. So for example, there is a task dropdown. If I know that I want to do some analysis, what kind of prompts are put together here? How can I start to use these? If you like any of them and know you'll want to use them in the future, you can hover over this little bookmark icon, and that's going to save the prompt to this second tab up here at the top called Your Prompts. You can save your own prompts, or you can save the suggested prompts, and these will then create a library of reference for you to use over and over again. And if you ever get in here and you go, okay, great, I'm actually not going to use this one anymore, simply clicking that bookmark icon will remove it from this section. You can still find it in suggested in the future. All right, couple other things that I want to point out here. Up here at the very top, you should see a little auto button that gives you a drop down. By default, it usually is on auto. The quick response and the think deeper are how deeply and how Copilot approaches the prompt that you're going to give. So if you leave it on auto, depending on what you send out, it will determine which experience to give you. And if you know that you want one of these specific experiences, we can set it before we start chatting and make sure that it is using that logic. I also really want to point out the new chat. This does sometimes look a little bit different for each person. So in my screen right here, it is just that little chat bubble with a plus icon. Sometimes it's more like a little square with a pencil coming through it. These are your new chat options, and it is really important to start a new chat anytime you change topics. So if I'm getting help with some data analysis and then I want to write an email about a parking update, then I will likely get the best experience if I start a new chat so that Copilot doesn't try to combine topics that were never intended to be interwoven. Now, I probably should have pointed this out first, but our little enterprise data protection icon is right here in that little shield. And if you have questions on what that means, there is a link that tells you more about that when you hover over that shield icon. And if you don't see that there, I would recommend coming down to the bottom left and making sure that you're not signed into a personal Copilot account, because that will have a different experience. All right, so let's get prompting. I know that's typically what most of us want to kind of start doing. So just to get us started, I'm going to put a prompt here in the chat. There is a section in brackets. So if anyone wants to put in the chat what they would like me to use here, just a favorite thing, favorite topic, could be French fries, could be a rubber duck, it could be music. What is your favorite thing? And I want to use Copilot to help compare to that topic. So looking at the chat, pasta. Okay, I like that. That was the quickest one, so that's the one we're going to go with. And I'm going to compare that experience at an 8th grade level to pasta. So you can kind of tell as it's starting to produce this search that it is using the think deeper option. Anytime you see these little dots coming up and these drop downs of what step it's on, this is that think deeper choice where it's going to think of the multiple interpretations your prompt could be asking for. It might even ask you questions in return, and you can kind of follow and troubleshoot logic from here. Well, let's see what it said. So wanted to keep it pretty simple, and it says Copilot Basic is like plain pasta. It is, oops, wasn't done generating. So let's scroll back up. It's free, it's useful. You can eat it as is, or you can add your own toppings to make it better. So I would imagine your own toppings would be things like your documents and your internal data that you can add through this little plus icon. So I am curious if you followed along with this chat, what else do you compare it to? And is there just a 1-sentence piece that you can put in the chat so that other people can kind of see what it came up with? Part of the reason I do this, as silly as it might sound, is I want you to see how quickly Copilot can help you tailor different types of messages to different audiences, whether that be the tone and complexity or whether that be the length and style and format that it needs to change to. Very quickly, I can take summaries and details and share them with an appropriate communication to my team. And off of that same information, I could make that for executive leadership as well. Those are going to have different tweaks and needs, but I can do both very quickly without having to take that extra administrative time to do that all myself. All right, I still would love to see if anyone follows along and tries this as well. All right, so one other thing that you can also take a look at is up here in your settings, you will see something called recent pages. So one of the things that we can do when we get responses from Copilot is, this is great here in a chat, but if I need to actually use this type of response, I'm probably going to need it in a different location or saved somewhere. So at the end of each of your responses, you should see this little copy response icon, and you should also see a little pencil with some lines behind it. The copy response is exactly what it sounds like. It just copies the entire element that was brought up here. We can paste it to a OneNote or Word document, wherever it makes sense. The other thing we can do is edit in Pages. So probably not on this particular analogy here, but if I need this full piece and I want to start tinkering with it, if I select that edit in Pages, it's going to give me a split screen view, and I can now start modifying the response Copilot gave me. It will include the conversational elements, so if you want to, we can just go ahead and delete those. And if any of you are familiar with Loop, this is a very similar experience built off of the same type of framework. So this is a collaborative space that I could share, I could give people access to, and I'd see them working in here real time. It also has, we'll scroll down and delete this conversational piece. If I hit that / as well, there's a number of pre-formatted templates and pieces I can add in here. So if you are trying to keep track of a project with a bunch of notes and different elements in here, you could actually have a task list. And this does integrate with your other task apps. So if you use Planner or To Do, as long as that person has access to this page and you've tagged them with an assignment, it will actually work with those as well. So I can get very, very into what all you can do here with Pages. A couple other things I'll point out is this piece up here where you see the backwards and the forwards arrow. Unlike your normal applications, this is not an undo and redo button. This is actually a version option. So as you start to make changes in here, if you need to go back to a previous version, you do have version history with this page as well. You also have the option to, once you've tinkered with it and made adjustments here, we can turn this into a document or a PDF. What happens when you do this is, we'll do this up here as well. So it's going to follow the title here based off of my prompt. That one's pretty good, so we're just going to try this right now. I have been seeing some errors today, so we'll excuse Copilot. Typically from this point, it's going to take everything from this page, turn it into a Word-friendly formatting, and save it directly to your OneDrive main folder. So when you do that, it's going to show up here in the My Files area. It shouldn't go into a file itself, should be a document down here. So that gives you some flexibility to actually start working with the data that you're getting from Copilot. Now, if I go ahead and close that out, and I realize later on that I want to go back to that page, there's a couple ways we can get there. I'm still in this chat, so I do have a link to that page here. I can just reopen that back up. We could also click on this 3-dot menu and select recent pages. This is again going to give me that split screen view. So two ways to get to that same piece, but you might not always have the quick link. And if you come over here on the left-hand side, there is a new section called Library. This is where all of your pages are stored, and they are going to be in chronological order. So the one I created today is at the very top, and other ones are going to be beneath that. You can also see some quick details like, hey, I've shared this page, other people have access. So you do have a couple quick visual icons here as well. All right. Now, when it comes to the chat history, you can see that I have a bunch of options down here. If you want to jump back into a context you've already created or just review a response you received, you can choose from the most recent chats you've had. If you don't see the chat you're looking for, we can select all chats or this little search icon, and they'll bring us to a bigger search. Again, it's primarily going to be in chronological order, but we can search our conversation off of keywords as well. So this is the most recent chat we had, and you actually have a pages symbol here to say, hey, from this chat, you actually created a page. So you get some quick data there as well. Now, I did see a question come up in the chat. It says, if I upload documents for reference, does Copilot remember the material, or will I need to re-upload those documents during each new conversation? So it's a great question. If I come back here to, and we'll actually do this here together, but let's go ahead and there's a couple ways to approach this. if the documents you're talking about are already in OneDrive or a cloud location, we can search those. If you are uploading directly from your device, you can also select this upload images and files, or let's use this as an example. You could drag and drop onto the prompt area. When we do it this way, notice I get an information icon that says, hey, uploading from a device is going to send a copy to OneDrive. That is just required for Copilot to be able to do any kind of view or analysis on it. So when it does that, where this goes is your OneDrive. If we scroll up, automatically in the background, let's see where that went. You should get a, oops, not that messy. You should get a section right here for Copilot chat files. I'm struggling to actually highlight that. So this is automatically made in the background for you. Now it does live in your cloud area. So if you wanted to use that again, you're still going to need to reference it and point it in that direction if I start a new chat. So it needs permission every time to use your documents. However, at that point, it will already be in the cloud and you don't have to keep uploading it. So for example, let's do this one here and let's just have it tell us a bit of a narrative on this file. So I'm letting it kind of take in some of this creativity. I imagine you won't be telling humorous narratives, but you can be really human with your approach on the tones and styles you want to layer together. So at this point in this conversation, any new chat that I send can reference this document I attached. As soon as I start a new chat, I do need to reattach or re-reference that document for it to pull. So let me know if that answers your question, and if not, happy to revisit. I also see another question. I understand there's an upload limit of 3 documents at this time. Is there a total document limit in Copilot? I'm curious what you mean by total document limit, but per prompt, yes, it is 3 per prompt. However, each prompt you can attach additional files. Sometimes this is beneficial because if you layer together information from each of those one piece at a time, it gives you a little more oversight. However, I know there's going to be times when you want to use more than that. So at this time, that's the maximum per prompt. I don't believe there is an official limit for the context of a single chat, if that's what you're referencing. Documents for analyzing for review. So it's going to be limited per prompt to that 3. However, I could send a couple additional ones here and try to leverage Copilot to compare additional ones together. Just keep in mind that the larger your data set, the larger your file you're uploading, sometimes if we try to ask it to reason over too much information at one time, we're just not going to see the detail and the results we want. So sometimes it is better to work in smaller pieces just for that higher quality from Copilot. All right, so let's see here. This was a all hands question, a document that just had a bunch of questions in it. So it's telling me at the Contoso all hands, the question read like the script of a workplace comedy. So it did fall into that humorous space here. And what I'll point out is we still have those reasoning steps. So if something went drastically wrong, let's review this and see if I missed a step. However, down here at the very bottom, even though I know which document I attached, it is going to cite its source here and say, hey, this paragraph came from this document. So especially as you're pulling in other information or referencing several documents at once, like was mentioned in the chat, you'll be able to see which pieces came from which documents. And you can always open these to verify or see the details right away. You should also at the very end see a full list of your sources. So if you reached out to the web and had a number of different sources pulling in information or updates, all of those are going to be listed down here. Now, Copilot's all about trying to help you, so it's going to offer you options pretty consistently. So for example, we are noticing right above our text box here that I have a number of suggestions to keep the conversation going. If we found it beneficial to create a poem for our team, maybe it will bring the team together, we can do that. But if we're really trying to, let's say, summarize the key concerns from the data. So we'll move away from that humor. Let's see what our main concerns are so that we can start putting a plan of action together. Now, of course, I still want to look over this data, but especially when it's a ton of numbers and you start to go cross-eyed a little bit, this can help you get to the root of what you're looking at and then point you in the right direction to verify. All right, I'm going to walk away. We'll look at this when we come back in just a second, but let's talk about a couple additional things. So context engineering is really just a fancy way of saying, what's your mindset when you start a conversation with any AI tool? If we treat these tools like they're a new employee joining our team, what kind of information and context would you provide that person so that they could be successful? If someone brand new joined my team and I said, hey, go analyze this forecasting data. If I haven't told them anything about history or what we're looking for from these results or anything like that, they might come back because they don't want to turn up empty-handed, but it's very unlikely it's going to be as detailed as I'm hoping it will be. So think about what you would tell a colleague to be successful. Point them in the right direction, give them the right sources, make sure that it's clear what the output is expected to be. Are there defined boundaries, like don't use these kinds of resources? And the more we talk in that natural state, the better our results start to come through. So it's a mindset to take on. Now, when it does come to prompting, there are things that are effective and things that are less effective. So with effective prompts, they're really specific and detailed. I really do like the idea of saying, what's the story around what you're trying to do? So that to me is the context I want to build. Usually I do operate in full sentences with very clear instructions, and I try to include that tone, purpose, any formatting details as well. So if I were to use just that basic starting point and say, hey, recap the article that I'm pointing out here, list top 3 concerns, I'm starting to put together a format and list of things that Copilot can check off and say it's done successfully. If I just say summarize this news about a particular company, I'm probably still going to get a recap. It might be in a couple of paragraphs, or it might be too long, or it might be too short. It might focus on the wrong set of information from that news article because it doesn't know where we're going with this story. So there's really no wrong way to do this, and keeping it as natural as possible is going to benefit you. But the best thing you can do is just practice and test out some of these different prompts and goals that you have, and let Copilot show you what it's capable of doing, and you'll pick up those nuances. So if you are looking for a framework for prompting, the most basic framework I start off with is consider giving the tool a role or persona to embody. So are we approaching this like a new team member, or are we approaching this like a senior analyst who has a ton of experience in this kind of data? The persona will change the lens at which Copilot moves through these tasks. The other reason that this does work is because with all of the data that it has access to, Copilot doesn't always know which one's the right data set. So giving a persona will hone in on certain knowledge sources and data sets for it to pull from. I would argue this is the most important piece, but clearly stating what your task is and what you're expecting it to accomplish is really crucial as well. So not to say anything too obvious, but if I'm looking for a summary, that's different than if I'm generating a report. And if I'm looking for a bottom line up front summary, that's different than a detailed list of all of the open action items I might give my team. So what's the task you're expecting to get accomplished? And what format are you hoping it comes through as? Are we writing this as a follow-up email? Are we putting together a full polished report with certain templating in mind? This is going to make adjustments. I will say sometimes the task is, hey, help me write this email. And email is a format. There's so much more formatting you can do. So again, the more detail we can say, hey, break it up into these topics, break it up into this many bullet points, or whatever that looks like. The next consideration is, who's your audience? Who are we tailoring our tone and complexity to? Just like with our persona, this gives AI a set of knowledge that it can reach out to tailor this results. And again, this is where sometimes we're taking the same core set of information, but presenting it to audiences that need different levels of detail. So this can help dramatically. And last but not least, what is the tone you're going for? You may notice in some of your suggested prompts and conversations, it might give you options to quickly adjust that tone, maybe make it more professional, more direct. It will try to guess some of those needs. But if we can include that on the very first prompt and maybe layer some of that humanness together and say, I want to be direct, I want to be succinct, and I also really want to be considerate or sympathetic because of something that happened. We can do all of that, and it's going to pull all those pieces together. The other tip that I would give when it comes to tone, I know a lot of people come back and say, it just doesn't sound like me. When you're working on tone and style, sometimes the best thing you can do is actually attach a really good example of your writing or the tone and style you're going for, because AI does a great job at mimicking and imitating those kinds of things. So whether it be formatting or tone and style and so forth, sometimes attaching those examples can really benefit you. So if we were to use all of those together, your prompt could look something like this, where we kind of take that fun Mad Lib approach and we string it all together. So think like a director, think like a trainer, because that's what's on my mind. And create a task. Maybe we're trying to do a brief, we're trying to do a presentation, trying to write an email. And as you start making those adjustments, truly any one of these blanks being changed is going to give you a drastically different result. So if anyone wants to use this, I will go ahead and paste this format in the chat for you as well. And it can be, again, just a starting point for you. So filled in, it might look something like this. Maybe it's a social media strategy we're going for. Who are we hoping to engage? So a couple of things that I want to kind of share when it comes to tips and tricks and ideas. I will get to all of that. I'm going to put this here on the screen for a moment and just ask if anyone has questions. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we address any of the main topics that are on your mind and a priority for you. So if you're looking for inspiration, what's here on the screen can give you ideas. Of course, we have summaries, but we can also leverage Copilot to help us compare options. One of my most recent favorite experiences with Copilot was I actually planned on just having a longer conversation. And I went in and I said, hey, here's a pain point I'm having. Here's the whole reason I go through this pain point. This is the end goal. Here's what I'm doing right now. Here's how I'm doing it. And then I let Copilot ask me a bunch of questions back. And we just moved back and forth trying to find a positive solution that I could actively implement for my team. And I'm going to be honest with you, it was really helpful, and it approached that task in a completely different way than I had considered. And for some of the things that I hadn't done before, gave me step-by-step directions on how to work with that tool in a different way or with a different outcome. So highly encourage being creative with it and letting it enhance what you're already working on. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and round off today's session with just revisiting some of the limitations, and we'll end on some prompting tips and tricks. So I know I mentioned AI hallucinations at the very beginning. Again, I want to emphasize that these tools are very different than search engines, and they're looking to guess at the next character and next word that might benefit you. However, that doesn't always work perfectly. And when you also take into account, sometimes we might forget a key detail or a key document. When that happens, it can give you incorrect elements. So just please make sure that you are always asking to verify. And if you don't see the results automatically, they're typically there. But if it doesn't give you citations, ask where it got the information. Say, please provide your sources. Please list your citations. However you want to phrase that, it should give you a full list of those sources afterwards. When it comes to tips and tricks, I alluded to this a moment ago, but one of the inherent characteristics of AI, I've heard a lot of people compare it to an overeager intern or a golden retriever. And when you think about those two things, most of the time they want to come back. They're very enthusiastic. They want to help. And sometimes it's not quite what we needed. However, most of the time when they approach it, they're not going to ask questions because that's just not how they were taught to respond to things. So when we actually invite Copilot to ask us questions back, it opens up the opportunity to see what context we were missing and what assumptions might be getting made. So I highly recommend having it ask you questions back. Sometimes I leave that really open-ended and say, ask me any questions to improve context. Other times I'll add on, list any assumptions that you've made so that I can start to see how it's approaching my topic. Whenever you're being creative, I also highly recommend having it give you multiple options. If I need to come up with a creative title, I'll usually start with what I can come up with. And then I'll say, give me five examples that are similar to this, and I'll craft my prompt. And then I pick and choose from some of the ideas I get from Copilot, and other times I don't use any of it. But it gives you more than just one option to go off of. And sometimes, at least for me, it can be easier to tweak something and adjust it than to start off with that blank slate. Another thing that you can do is ask Copilot to show its work. I will say, depending on how you phrase this, sometimes it comes back and says, I can't show you exactly what my reasoning was. That's okay. The reason that we would do that, even when we can see those steps that I showed you earlier, those processing steps, is everything in your conversation is contextual. So as you kind of force Copilot to give you more context for how it's working through a problem, it forces more context into that story and gives you some insights on, again, what might need to change in a future iteration or follow-up prompt. It's also really good at creating FAQs. So if you have a new policy document or a SharePoint page you're trying to post some updates to, you can attach different items and say, hey, help me create an FAQ for these topics. To be fair, it's not going to be frequently asked questions. It will be anticipated unless you have gathered that data. However, that still does give you a starting point, and sometimes reading it in a question answer format resonates a little more clearly than the official language of a policy document. So, a couple other ideas there. Another tip that I would give, especially for those of you who are still starting out, is have Copilot help you write a prompt. If you're about to go do some intense data analysis and you want to leverage Copilot, tell it what the goal is. Hey, I'm doing some financial forecasting for projected budgets in this quarter or whatever that story sounds like. And then say, help me craft a really high quality prompt to analyze this data. Here's the kind of information this data has. So I know I spoke really fast, but hopefully you start to see how I'm pulling that story together. And then I would actually combine this with the example I gave a moment ago and say, help me write 3 different data analytic prompts to get the most out of this. And then again, you can kind of see what that high quality looks like and pull from it as you would like to. And I also alluded to this last option here a little bit earlier, but sometimes we get tempted to want to write some of those really large page-long looking prompts. And to be fair, the prompt text box in Copilot does have a very high character limit. So it's not that that's not possible. Sometimes, though, you are going to get better results when you take those large tasks and turn them into bite-sized pieces so that you can influence the growth of how that all comes together. So food for thought, just some different approaches to try. And before we close out today, again, please feel free to ask any of those questions that you haven't yet, but just some tools for success. I mentioned it at the beginning, but please keep a growth mindset. This tool is moving so fast, things are changing all of the time. And as someone who is in and exploring Copilot and its capabilities and trying to figure out if I can break it, it moves fast that even sometimes I feel behind. So if that gives you any solace, just know that everyone's kind of in that same boat and there's no one right way to do it. We're just looking to enhance our workflow, improve and progress, not necessarily come out with perfection every single time we interact. So all of that being said, thank you all so much for taking the time today. I know it was the day right after a holiday for most of us. So thank you for joining us today. And if you have anything that you're looking for in the future, we have helped a number of organizations as they have worked to implement Copilot. So please let us know if we can help with anything. I would also just love to get any feedback that you have. So I'm launching a poll here in the chat. Hopefully that works for you. Let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see in the future. But let me put a little bit of information down here in case you would like to reach out.